Hello and welcome to Cheshire Audio. Now, retro review. I have a pink triangle turntable. A pink triangle, you probably have come across this in my videos before actually. I really like pink triangle turntables. They did feature quite strongly in my sort of most unreliable turntables ever made video as well, which is another story. May or may not go into that as we go along, but anyway. Pink was started by Neil Jackson and Arthur Kubisarian in I think probably the late 70s I would have thought. I'm not quite sure when it all kicked off. There's various models. There was the original pink triangle, which I don't think I've ever seen one. PT1, which is, as we have here, PT2, spelt T-O-O. Pink Triangle Export, Pink Triangle Anniversary. And the last one, I can never remember whether it was called Tarantella or Tarantula. But I think that was the last Pink Triangle product from what I remember. And then it became Arthur continued as Funk Firm after that, I think. Apparently, Pink Triangle's back. They were at the Bristol Hi-Fi show, so I don't know what's happening there. I don't know whether that's a thing or not really, but it'd be quite interesting to find out actually. But anyway, yeah, coming back to PT1, these were produced between 1979 and about 85. This particular one is quite early. There was a motor position change halfway through the life of these, and this is the earlier one. I'll show you in more detail shortly, because what I'll do is take the platter off and show you whatever. Quite interesting design, these. I mean, if you just sort of looked at, if I sort of showed this to a customer in the shop and said, how old do you think this deck is? I don't know, most people would say 10, 15 years old possibly, because it's got a few signs of wear, but it's got a nice modern looking acrylic platter on it. It's got a brightly coloured lid. It's, you know, it's a good looking deck really. But it's over 40 years old, and if you sort of imagine in context of the competition for this, you've got your Linson decks and the early days Roxanne Xerxes, the deck called the Source, I seem to remember, and there's all sorts of other decks around, and they're all very staid, sort of blocky looking wood veneered decks with sort of metal platters and all this sort of thing. And here we've got acrylic platter, which I think was the first use of acrylic platter on a turntable. DC motor, which was unusual at the time. That mostly AC. Everybody seemed to use Prematech or Airpax motors. Seemed to be across the board that really, but not Pink Triangle. Internally, it's very similar to a Sondek in some ways, or a suspended 3-point suspended subchassis deck. Things like your Thorenses and your Aristons and your Sondeks, but it's sort of ultra lightweight construction. It's really ahead of its time again, really. The Pink isn't like, because the Lin has a top plate and 3 bolts hanging from the top plate, which have springs attached, and then there's a sub-chassis that hangs from the springs, and it's all, the top plate's a little bit random on a Sondek. It's sort of quite a resonant thing, really. I've never quite understood why they do it that way. And the sub-chassis on the Sondek is quite a heavy steel thing. Or it isn't nowadays, but at the time it was quite heavy steel. Pink Triangle has a very lightweight but very rigid sort of T-bar that isn't attached to the top plate quite. I think it's sort of attached in places, but it's kind of sort of semi-isolated from it. Springs hang from that, the motor's attached to that, but then the springs hang from, and then the sub-chassis isn't heavy steel. It's made of a material called Aerolam, which is used in the air industry. It's almost like a sandwich of top plate, bottom plate, and then almost like reinforced cardboard, how you have the sort of, inside you have sort of like a zigzag of material, and it's all kind of, I think it's aluminium. So it's very, very rigid, very strong, no flex in it whatsoever, but very, very light as well, so it doesn't sort of store any energy. So it's light years ahead of things like Sondek, really, in design. The bearing's unusual as well. It's an inverted bearing. I'll show you that in a sec. I'll not talk through that just yet. I'll have to show you that just to show you the different features of it, because that's quite interesting. I'll also show you what this little bit of pink string is, because this is a very important Pink Triangle accessory. Some people have got the original, some not. I think this might be a bit of a replacement one, but anyway. So yeah, what I'll do is let's turn the camera around and let's have a proper look at it. Yeah, so yeah, it's a pretty good looking deck really. Even today's standard, it looks quite modern. Pink lid. I mean, this is quite unusual to still have Still have the pink lid. This might be a replacement actually. It looks a bit thicker than usual. It's got the trademark glue marks around the edges because they weren't pressed, these. They were sections and glues which were glued together, which eventually used to fall apart, really, which is another sort of bane of people's lives, is the lid's coming apart. Like I say, acrylic platter, a little triangular switch on that. The later models had a sort of an acrylic on-off switch that came out here, but we've got 33 off 45. Changeable arm board there. So this one's got a Lin LVX on it. It's not even a basic plus or a Nikito. It's quite, so that's quite early on. This will be an early 80s tone arm, so it's probably its original arm. Detachable head shell. A lot of the early basics had a detachable head shell, which I think the Plus was the upgrade when it was fixed. So yeah, okay. What I'll do, I'll just take the platter off and let's have a look at the bearing. It's quite interesting. Okay, so that's with the platter off. Platter, you can see, is sort of cut out underneath. So it's a one-piece platter. The sort of the sub platter is sort of incorporated within it in the single piece, which makes putting the belt on quite interesting, which I'll show you in a sec, and it may involve pink string. So underneath the actual bearing is a separate component. Yeah, the platter sits on over the top of here. If you take the bearing off, you'll find that it's sort of the reverse of what you would normally expect. You've got the spindle is attached to the sub-chassis, and the bearing, which would normally be attached to the sub-chassis, is actually floating and fastened is part of the platter. What you've got inside here is, I think there's a tungsten carbide ball bearing right at the bottom of the housing. And on the top of here, there's a little cup, which I think is either sapphire or ruby. I think they sort of went from one to the other. I can't remember which way around, to be honest. I think the originals might have been ruby, but had a tendency to crack, so they changed. Can't remember which way around that is. I should have Googled, I know. Really good bearing, much more stability because it's a higher contact point. It's inherently more stable. It's just sort of this sort of out of the box thinking you get with Pink Triangle, really. What I'll try and do now is put the belt on. I'm not going to work out how to do this because it's a two-handed job and I'm holding a camera. Give me a sec, I'll set the camera up and we'll do that. Right, I've absolutely no idea how this is going to go now. Right, so you've got your platter, can you see that? Platter, you put the belt on, onto the platter like that. You get your pink string, which I'll have to put on the floor a sec while I do this. This is probably the fiddliest of all turntables to get the belt on. So you put the pink string through, where are we? Pink string through the belt, so loop it through, and you pull on the pink string and sort of secure it like that. Then that was my knee cracking. It's just ridiculous amounts of effort to put a belt on. Very carefully place that over. And you can either keep the bearing housing within the platter, or you can do it this way around. I've never quite worked out which is best. When you put the belt on, you have to make sure that you've pulled the belt beyond the motor. So if you can see that, if I just release the string now, I should be able to, if I've got this right, just take the string away and the belt's on. Just about impossible to show that, but that's how you do it anyway. That's probably the most complicated way to fit a belt of any turntable I've ever come across. But because of the design of it, there's no other way to do it. So I can sort of, yeah. You just have to go with the flow, don't you, really? Anyway. Okay, I've taken it off again because I was doing things in completely the wrong order. I forgot to talk about the motor. Yeah, so motor positioned over here. The later versions, they went through sort of 180 degrees and positioned it over here so it's further from the tone arm. Tiny little pulley on these because it's a DC motor, and DC motors tend to run at higher RPMs, so probably more accurate quieter, various reasons for DC really. Not as easy to keep the speed consistent. That's the only probably the drawback. They do need a decent sort of control board with them. That is sort of the negative side of it, as we found out with this one really. But yeah, let's turn the camera around. I think I'm finished here now. Let's move on. So there it is, Pink Triangle PT1. I mean, it's got to be one of the most natural and open sounding turntables I've ever come across really. I mean, I had a a Pink Triangle Export, which was sort of a later generation of this, and it was fabulous. It was such a good turntable. You just had this fantastic insight into the recording of your records and everything. It just so involving, so beautifully sort of presented the music that there's nothing. I don't think there's much like them really. I mean, I've sort of listened to some real high-end, crazy decks that looks like starships, and they just seem sort of very analytical and almost bland by comparison to things like this. And okay, it's got its quirks, and probably if you buy one of these second hand, you're going to have problems with it. It depends. It depends. It depends how sort of much trouble you want to go to with this. Really, I'd love a Pink Triangle again, but even from my point of view, who I can sort of probably sort out most problems on these, still not sure about whether I'd want to go through it again. Really, I don't know. Like I say, wonderful turntables, but you have to understand what you're taking on with them a little bit, really. Particularly like this one, which is like over 40 years old now. So anyway, let's just turn the camera around. Yeah, so hope you like that one. Pink Triangle PT1. I'm so pleased that's come in, to be honest. Really pleased. It's made me start to think about whether I need to buy one again. I don't know. Are they too much trouble? I don't know. I've not listened to this much yet. What I'm intending to do, just because it needs testing, I'm going to set it up in the top demo room, because I've got a little reference jig downstairs, and I can play stuff on to make sure everything's working, everything's in time and all that sort of thing. But actually sitting down and doing any critical listening, I always pull things up into the demo room, and I'm very tempted to have an afternoon listening to the Pink. I don't often do that, but it's one of those decks, isn't it? Anyway, I'll leave it there. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to give a subscribe and a like, and I will see you in a future video. No idea what that video will be yet, because my mind's gone completely blank. But thanks for watching. See you soon.